You're on.
I guess we're live. You're listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And I don't know if you tapped into any of what we've been talking about so far, but we were kind of caught up in a conversation about some things going on in nursing homes and, maybe some of the choices in terms of giving elderly folks nutrition may not be the best. Also the stress of it all, just dealing with the stress of this kind of situation, of dealing with family members who are in a nursing home and their care, and working through the people at the nursing home and trusting them to do the right thing. But unfortunately, nursing home standards are not up to par with the standards of a lot of similar facilities in other countries. But we're talking in the U.S. We're just not doing a good enough job. Let's put it that way. And in terms of what kinds of quote-unquote nutrition people are getting in nursing homes and many other medical facilities, the content of the pseudo foods that they're fed include many things that are inflammatory, and also a lot of sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if somebody has dementia already, adding sugar to their diet and continuing to fuel that buildup is not helpful. Actually, is counterproductive. It's kind of similar to the situation I've seen in a certain local cancer facility where they feed cancer patients Ensure, which is loaded with sugar, like 45 grams of it per serving, and then maybe has 10 grams of protein. So the amount of sugar they're getting is tremendous in that kind of thing. And I know that Ensure and similar companies, Boost or whatever the other ones are, market themselves as a nutritional supplement, but some of what's in those things is really just not good. And then on beyond that, the kinds of nutrition that are in there are not the best either. So we need to, I feel that there's a need to look closer at how we're doing these things. I think that in some cases the facility may have, say, a dietitian who is quote unquote the nutritionist at the facility, and maybe that dietitian is trained based on the food pyramid and that kind of thing, and tries to go along with that. But in actuality, in many of these situations, the worst thing you can do is have that bottom end of that pyramid be the largest part of the diet. And that, what I'm referring to there is grains. Adding huge amounts of grains to the diet of somebody who has dementia is actually making things worse. And it can certainly contribute to blood sugar regulation issues if they also have diabetes or any other glucose regulation issue. But there is a reason that Alzheimer's is sometimes called diabetes type 3, because it is very related to glucose metabolism and how much sugar you're consuming in your diet and how that affects you. So that's the kind of thing we were talking about, and kind of got away from ourselves there as far as the timing on the show. So apologies to everyone listening, but we are on on that. And I would like to also talk about stress. And obviously, the stress of that situation is pretty significant, and for family members can be very difficult to deal with, especially if it's close, if there's closeness involved, if there's a lot of caring involved, which there usually is, and you have people in the family who are really truly caring about the health and well-being of the individual in the nursing home. And if that nursing home is not one of the higher caliber nursing homes, there may be some issues. And bed sores are a common issue as well. Bed sores, just not enough getting them out of bed, enough getting them more active in some way, coping with those things. And what we have is facilities that are largely run by, say, a single or maybe a couple of MDs who are overseeing it in terms of the medical treatment. But then we have maybe a nurse on staff sort of guiding some of the processes going on. And then we have a bunch of CNAs or patient care techs who are basically administering whatever has been doled out to them, and are fed the same kind of information that the patient families are fed for the most part. In other words, they're not very knowledgeable about what the decisions may lead to in terms of the effects on the family member. So there are some issues there, and that's stressful to deal with that situation, because in some cases, this sounds kind of radical, but in some cases, the nursing homes are analogous to the asylums of about over 100 years ago, when the early treatment of psychological disorders was things like strapping people down in beds all day. Electroshock therapy was a way to deal with mood issues, these kinds of things. They're not giving patients, at least for the most part, or residents of nursing homes, that kind of therapy. However, some of the dietary choices are really not good choices. And I think I'm being redundant, but let me get more specific. Let's say, okay, we were talking about grains. Grains, the reason grains are a problem is that they are primarily sugar. And in fact, the majority of grains are very much composed of glucose, which is the lowest form of sugar. It's already at the broken down state, except that there are chains of it. So once those chains are broken through mastication or chewing of the food, then we end up with broken down chains of molecules of glucose molecules. And the glucose goes right into the bloodstream. So we have this surge of sugar in our bloodstream, in the bloodstream of those who are consuming these foods. So when we talk about, back to that pyramid design, where the majority of the food consumed, the largest portion is grains, we're adding to the problem. We're creating a lot of sugar in the bloodstream and adding to the situation of that effect on the brain. So to go along with that, there are other kinds of foods that can add to the sugar levels, like mashed potato, for example. Mashed potato is broken down, it's mashed. There's is some value in potato, like the potassium levels are very important and historically very important in terms of, potato famines and lack of potassium in the diet of people. There are stories of the Irish going through this and so on. But in terms of the content of sugar, it's pretty high. And when we go to other foods like rice, the same is true. When we go to even starchy foods such as corn, which in addition to majority of it being genetically modified in the US, which gets us into a whole other realm of tests that show cancer development in animals consuming genetically modified foods, these kinds of things. Then we have also just the sugar content in the corn. So many of these foods are like that. Now, if you want to get into the lower glycemic index foods, there are ways of substituting those foods in the nursing homes or in anyone else's diet, for that matter. Anyone dealing with diabetes especially should be concerned about the glycemic index of the foods that they eat. And looking into that, there are ways of approaching that, and there are foods available, even more so now than they used to be. In fact, there's becoming a significant amount more awareness now than there was a decade ago, say, about the content of food and the effect on the health of individuals. And I think what's happened to a certain extent is that people have become aware that the old model of the conventional doc who tells you, take this drug, gives you a prescription for this drug, that's going to take care of the situation, the symptoms, but doesn't deal with the underlying causes or contributors to the disorder, doesn't work. You still end up having long-term consequences of the disease or disorder that you're experiencing. So yes, it is a stopgap. It might affect the symptoms, help the symptoms out, but you're still going to see the long-term consequences. Because if you continue to do what you've been doing, things continue to go that direction, and it's very hard to fight it. So, we need to look at how our food affects our health. Food choices are huge in terms of health. I can give you some simple examples. For example, sodium. Everybody knows about sodium, I think. Sodium is a major contributor to blood pressure issues, right? So we have an issue of, basically it's the balance of sodium and potassium, or imbalance thereof. And, when you have a large amount of sodium in your diet, you are going to be setting yourself up for more problems with blood pressure issues and doing some damage in your body as well, because of the refined nature of the sodium is going to grab onto certain molecules in your body. So it's going to be creating some damage. Now, we all need sodium, but we also need potassium, and they need to be balanced out. And we have little pumps that go throughout our bodies that are part of the way that our body works in terms of movement of fluids and this kind of thing. So it's important. The majority of folks in the US are eating a lot of sodium because the diets are not the best. I mean, the foods are not raw, fresh, foods. They're refined. They're manufactured foods. And a lot of manufactured foods have sodium in there, partly to preserve them in some cases, or to cure them, but not cure in the sense of a medical cure, but curing the foods. And this can be a problem. So that's just one example. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of improving things, and it's good to see that there is a lot of movement that direction. But let me stress another factor. So one of the things that's been going on is that gluten-free has become more common. Gluten-free foods are very helpful and useful in some conditions, especially for people with autoimmune disorders, because gluten tends to be a trigger for an autoimmune response. And so cutting back or eliminating gluten from the diet can be helpful in reducing the incidence of those immune responses, and therefore improving the quality of life of an individual that has an autoimmune disorder. So disorders such as celiac are also part of the issue with that, and the sensitivity to the gliadin that's in the gluten in the foods. So we have these kinds of things affecting health, and when people are consuming a lot of grains in their diet, there are many things that's affecting. It's affecting the sugars, as I mentioned earlier, and it's affecting perhaps the immune response, and it's just giving your body quite a bit of work to do, essentially, to clear that. Then we have other areas that are significant as well. So the sugars, the proteins, then there's a presence of another dietary substance that is very much in use in the foods, and that is soy. And again, another genetically modified food for the most part. In the United States, that's what we're consuming. If we're consuming soy that is not organic soy or just non-GMO, most of it is going to be GMO or genetically modified. So this is also a trigger for autoimmune responses. So if somebody has an autoimmune disorder, there's a chance that that will trigger I want to call it a cascade, but a reaction or a crisis of some sort, okay, that relates to whatever the disorder may be. Dairy is another one, but I think of all the triggers, that's probably the least prominent. Certainly gluten is very prominent and soy is very prominent. So these are problems in the foods, along with some of the other uses of other chemicals that are involved in the baking process that can cause problems and can lend to further issues with metabolic problems or disorders that relate to the metabolism. If somebody is, say, suffering from metabolic syndrome where they have hypertension, they have elevated cholesterol, they have even blood sugar regulation issues, etc. Certainly the kind of diet that I've been discussing is not a good thing for them. And so we have a lot of the nursing home folks who have metabolic syndrome, along with perhaps Alzheimer's or dementia or other issues that affect their brains, their thinking, their memory, and their health. Could be affecting cardiovascular health, for example, and other things, kidney function even, with these kinds of foods. And so, we need to be looking at specifically what people are eating. And nursing homes just are not equipped to do this in a way that is helpful to the health. And, this is also part of the issue is that conventional medicine is so focused on acute disorders and emergency situations and the use of drugs to compensate for those, that there's no focus on the underlying cause, or very little focus on that. There's very little focus on the effects of diet and nutrition. There's some on the nutrition, missing the diet. The diet in terms of not the saying something glib like eat lots of fruits and vegetables might come out of the mouth of a physician once in a while. They may say hold off on the salt. That's another one that's commonly, listed out in the standard description of what should be in the conversation. But when it comes to all of the additives, the preservatives, the processing of the foods, the chemicals that are going into all of that, and their effects on the health, there's very little. Those things aren't addressed through conventional medicine at all, virtually at all. So we need more attention to those things because they are important to health. And so if we look at the other part of these kinds of situations with the nursing homes, there's the stress, the family stress. So for both parts, like an individual with Alzheimer's, for example, or dementia, may be okay part of the time, but part of the time they're realizing that they're not doing so hot. Part of the time they may be more aware that, hey, I'm not remembering things, or I'm forgetting a lot, or I don't know where I am, or I don't know who I'm talking to, or, I'm all alone. They may feel alone, or I'm just getting all these things given to me and I don't know why. I don't know what this is for. I have this stuff going on with me medically. They're doing things to me. I don't know why. I don't know what that's for. And even if somebody's explained it to them, they're probably going to forget it in the next couple of minutes, this kind of thing. So that's a very scary and stressful situation for the resident or patient. And there's very little awareness of that aspect as well. It's something that needs some attention. It's very important to look at the biopsychosocial aspects of medical care and the environment that's available to the individual. For example, if somebody is stressed as a patient or a resident by the conditions they're in, some things can be done about that. For example, the environment within the room they're in, or the whatever it may be that they're in. It may be a room, or they may be in a sharing an apartment in some facilities where they're assisted living as opposed to nursing homes. But improving that environment can be helpful, can be more serene, can be pleasant, and that can take away some of that stress or help to alleviate some of the stress. If there are no windows in the place, they can't look out. That's very confining and very difficult, for an individual. So if they are not able to see out, that can feel very badly to the individual. They may feel trapped. They may feel isolated. If there's no distraction in terms of like a television or a radio even, that can be a problem. So having things in the environment that help with that. You can even have family members with their names on them. A picture like that in their room can be a great thing to help them click on that and help them to remember their family or remember folks that they know. Having their pictures with their names on them can help them with recall in some cases. If somebody likes to be at the beach, then maybe, a beach scene in the background, maybe a picture of the beach hanging on the wall, live plants in the room, things like this. If they like nature, that's certainly going to be helpful to do more of that. But typically people just kind of vibrationally feel better with a natural environment in their area. Activities can be very important. Getting them out of that room, getting them outside the building, even getting them outdoors, having an area where they can enjoy themselves. Be out just walking in the area or things like this, going for the walks. And I know a lot of these things are done in nursing homes, but a lot of them aren't, and or at least they're not done very well. There's more work to be done. There's a lot more work, and we can do that for ourselves. Those of us who are not in nursing homes or assisted living facilities that are going through our daily stressful lives, we can have plants in our offices. We can have serene sounds. We can have nice serene sounds in the background. I'm not talking just things like binaural sounds or, really meditative things, but that can be helpful as well. But also just basics like having some plants in your office, having calm, peaceful sounds, serene music or nice music, something that you like in the background, maybe even just turned down so that it doesn't interfere with conversation, but you can still hear it a little bit. These kinds of things in the environment can be important to the work environment and helping people to feel more comfortable and more, cozy in their environments. So this helps with stress. There are a lot of things that can be helpful with dealing with stress, and these are some of them, just focusing on the environment of the individual. So when we address these things, we're creating an environment or a foundation on which we can improve the environment for the individual. And, in our own lives, the stress of it all, we need to understand that things have a way, first of all, of working out one way or another. They have a way. That heightening our intensity of focus on those things, unless they're needing to be focused on, can actually add to the problem. So what I'm trying to get at there is, for example, catastrophizing. When we have a lot of people, I've seen a lot of people like this, that have this issue of catastrophization or catastrophizing, where everything that happens is like an ultimate crisis. It's horrible. It's how are they going to deal with it? It's too much, this kind of thing. And the reaction is this intense, horrible thing is happening. Well, every little problem along the way is not a crisis. And some people respond to every situation as if it is a crisis. And I'm reminded now of Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. One of the things he talks about in there is a matrix or a grid. And the grid is of division of 2 factors, importance and urgency. So we may attach importance to things that aren't so important, for one. And then we may attach urgency to them when they're not that urgent, but they feel urgent. Like if it feels like we need to get something done, but there may be plenty of time to get it done, or it may be something that can wait. So there's importance and there's urgency, and understanding the distinction between the two can be helpful in improving the mindset regarding stressful events in your life. Understanding that, yes, this is important, but it's really not urgent. So I need to put it down on the calendar and set some time for it, but I don't have to do it right away. So to categorize those kinds of things and have them set up to be on a list of things, to-do list, but have them scheduled, kind of takes care of the fact that they're important, right? So you are setting time, you're designing them into the schedule, defining when and how they need to be addressed, this kind of thing. That's treating them as important. If they're not urgent, that's fine. Now, if they're also urgent, that's the kind of thing that needs to be done quickly, right? So you have the important and urgent situations that need to be addressed immediately or quickly. But we have a lot of these situations where, they're a desire, they're more of a want than a need, and they may be somewhat important, but not all that important. If they're just a want and not that urgent, probably not urgent at all if they're just a want. But the needs may have a little more urgency at times, or they may have a little more importance. So we especially don't want to attach urgency or importance to things that are simply wants and not really needs. I think this kind of confusion happens a lot for people. There's a lack of division between wants and needs. And that simple division can help to remove a lot of stress. So you have urgency and importance. If it's not important and not urgent, you get to it when you get to it. If it's important but not urgent, schedule it. If it's urgent but not important, well, if it's not important, then how urgent is it, really? So you have to define whether it's really something that needs to be addressed or not. But if it's both important and urgent, absolutely, you get on it. So when we divide things out this way, we break them up into pieces, into really needing to be addressed or not. And that immediately divides off some of the stress. If you're walking around with all these things on your mind and not able to prioritize them, prioritizing on paper can help, because then you can define, you can schedule things that are important but not urgent, and you can define what is urgent and important, especially first. You need to address that, need to get that wrapped up in terms of what needs to be done and so on. If it is important, schedule it. If it's urgent, look at whether it really needs to be done or not. Because if it's not important, but it's urgent, then is it really urgent? That's the question. And then if it's not important and not urgent, you'll get to it eventually. But you don't need to carry it around in your mind because it's not important and it's not urgent. So just clear that out. Move on to other thoughts that may be a little more important and possibly urgent. So this kind of approach can take a lot of stress out of just dealing with everything during your day. Prioritizing is a big part of that. And that's really important in understanding with clarity what you need to be doing through your day. And, you know, if something can be done within 3 weeks, and that's the urgency. It's not really that urgent, and you have 3 weeks to do it. You don't need to drop everything and do it, right? That's not that urgent. If something needs to be done that day, and if it's not done, will lead to large issues with something or another, that's pretty urgent and has some importance to it. So we need to kind of break those things down. So, you know, we've been talking about different things, but stress is part of it, and some of how we have stress in our lives, and then looking at nursing homes. This has been kind of a potpourri, but the nursing homes and the situations there, and the nutrition and diet, and maybe not be addressed very well. Somebody needs to be looking at those things. And unfortunately, I don't think a lot of the nursing home facilities have designed in staff to address some of these issues. They may have a dietitian, but not somebody who's truly a nutritionist focused on nutrition. And then they may not have anyone, and this is very likely, considering what else is in the food, you know, like high fructose corn syrup, like bromides and bromates that affect, you know, in the baked goods, that affect thyroid function, and even fluoride and chlorine in the water, but additives, preservatives, things that affect hormones, parabens, you know, these kinds of things. Even colors. Some of the artificial colors can affect moods. Some of the artificial colors have some evidence of carcinogenicity. So there's a lot of issues in the way that food is done in the U.S. It's kind of like we're being experimented on, you could say. You know, this isn't a conspiracy theory, but in a way, it's like if it passes through the FDA, then it's okay. And it may be generally regarded as safe because it's in small quantities. But if you're consuming some of these things regularly, the assumption of small quantities isn't valid. And so they may not be so safe. And this is part of the problem with some of the way that these things are defined. And may need, you know, it's going to take some more work of many, many people for a long, long time, years and years of work going into all of these issues for any little movement of that meter, you know, any little movement of things forward. But we have been seeing it. We've been seeing more gluten-free foods. We've been seeing more, you know, non-GMO labels. So more foods are available that are specifically not GMO. And another thing that I've seen is that there's been some movement in terms of acknowledgement that foods are genetically modified. In fact, you'll if you look now, you can see some of the foods that obviously will not say non-GMO, not non-genetically modified organisms, but some of the foods will actually say this package contains foods or substances that have been sourced from genetically engineered sources. We're starting to see labels actually acknowledging that fact. So if you're looking at your peanut butter, look down at the bottom there on the label and see if it has that kind of statement. And then you know you're eating genetically modified peanuts. Or if you look at other foods, you can look for this kind of thing, and you can filter those out of your diet. Now, one of the issues I meant to bring up there, and I didn't really get into, this the gluten-free. An aspect of that is that some people think that if it says gluten-free, that means it's healthy. Not true. Or some people think that if it says not genetically modified, that means it's healthy. Not true. Or organic, that means it's healthy. Not true. It depends on you as an individual. What is your physical health like? What kinds of issues do you have in your health? Okay? If you're eating gluten-free and you're diabetic, so you're eating all these foods, you're saying, okay, I'm getting gluten-free pasta, I'm getting gluten-free grains, I'm getting gluten-free bread, I'm getting gluten-free whatever, all those types of foods, the starchy foods, guess what? You're doing yourself a disservice. You're getting a ton of sugar because that all breaks down to sugar, regardless of whether it's gluten-free or not. Okay? You're still getting sweets in your diet, and that's a problem. Okay? This is true for lung function as well. If you're eating gluten-free all the time and you think you're doing yourself well with that, well, if you're getting a lot of carbs in your diet, regardless of whether they're gluten-free or not, they're going to be contributing to a problem with processing oxygen in your body. So if you can eliminate those things, that can help you breathe better. Or if you're getting foods that have additive colors, artificial colors that are a problem, like the yellow dyes tend to be a problem with lung function. There's some evidence of that. But so choosing gluten-free is not necessarily going to be the healthy choice for you. Choosing sugar-free is a big one. Not necessarily healthy, okay? It is not healthier to choose Splenda over sugar. Believe it or not. Splenda increases your insulin resistance, which, if you're trying to fight the effects of diabetes, actually increases the likelihood of you getting it, or can contribute to glucose regulation issues. Maybe make your diabetes worse. So artificial sweeteners are not necessarily the answer, or not the answer. They're not the answer. But there are some natural sweeteners that do better. One of those is xylitol. Xylitol is pretty good for blood sugar regulation issues. So there are ways of improving things and still eating well. But just because something says gluten-free or says non-GMO or says any of those other things, it doesn't mean that they are healthy for you. You need to be making choices based on your health and your any disorders that you may be experiencing and that kind of thing. And this is true for the foods in the nursing homes. People need to be looking at those things and really figuring out what these folks are getting. there's a lot of things that have these parts in them, the additives in them, that don't help the health. Okay, so for example, one of the issues can be a fatty liver. That's fairly common. And high fructose corn syrup, as much as the corn industry tries to tell you it's the same as sugar, it's not the same as sugar. Your body doesn't process it the same way. Your liver doesn't process high fructose corn syrup the way that it processes sugar. It is not processing it properly, and this is part of that fatty buildup. So on and on, you know, there's so many issues to look at in terms of what's in the food, and those things can affect even the handling of stressors, because if there's a lot of sugar in the diet, that affects your body's response. Your body may respond by having a lagging effect of the production of insulin. You're going to get this surge of insulin that's going to drop your blood sugar level. And then you're going to run low on those sugars, and your brain's going to be looking for more sugar and telling all of your body that it needs sugar, and you're going to go through a stressed response there. And that's going to further add to the stress. So making good choices on foods, having good fruits and vegetables and good nutritious food, and not eating sweet or starchy foods can make a big difference in your health. Whether you're diabetic, whether you have dementia, whether you have Alzheimer's, whether you have metabolic syndrome, any of these things can be affected by this. In fact, I would say that starches and grains are a huge issue for the majority of the population. And on that note, that's it with today. You've been listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, WSPF-DB.com. And I'm Dr. Christopher Jackson, PhD, DOM, Florida. I didn't even say that today at the beginning. And the show is named after the practice, A Path to Wellness. You can take a look at us on the web at www.aptw.net, which is short for A Path to Wellness. Or you could reach us if you want to by phone at 727-329-9637. We're in Northeast St. Petersburg, Florida. And right at the moment, we're actually in downtown St. Petersburg, Florida, doing this show. So nice talking to you. Talk to you next time.